2 days in a row, John. To what do we owe the pleasure?
Well, usually it means that markets are crashing and the economy may be in trouble.
Yeah, we've never called you when things are well. Now that I think about it, I don't think we've ever called
Nobody
you.
cares about the economic
really great day
when
yesterday.
things are going
Let's talk to John
okay.
about it.
That's good, though.
All right,
if things are going
what
well,
happened? I don't trust
have to
anyone
think
even
about the
reporting on
economy.
what happened.
It's when things are going badly
right.
that you start to put it on your mind.
Yeah. So what happened yesterday? What happened?
It was overdetermined. We had a huge sell-off.
I don't know what that means.
We had a huge sell-off yesterday, and there were multiple causes that could have individually caused the market to sell off, and they all were happening around the same time. And so when you combine them together, you get a pretty big sell-off. So number one, we had the bad jobs number last week. But again, that was last week. Why did it cause a sell-off in Japan? Why did it cause a sell-off on Monday rather than just Friday? We also had the Bank of Japan last week unexpectedly raise its interest rates. That caused a lot of people who are borrowing very cheaply in Japan to both buy Japanese stocks, but also buy stocks in the U.S. They started to worry, oh, no, maybe I won't be able to borrow cheaply in Japan. And so they started to sell assets. You'll hear people mention that as the carry trade unwind. That's what that means. People borrowed cheaply in Japanese yen, were buying assets all over the world. They had to sell them because Japanese interest rates are going up. The other thing that happened, frankly, and this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot other than right here and on Breitbart, is that Kamala Harris's odds of winning went way up in the polls. Donald Trump's odds were at, according to Nate Silver, were at something like 70% chance that he was going to win when he was running against Joe Biden. Biden drops out. Harris comes in. There's a lot of excitement behind her. She's up in some of the polls. It's basically a toss-up right now. That was a pretty dramatic change in what to expect about the future. And I think that also played a big role in Monday's sell-off.
Wow. What can you put? Is it right to put the sell-off into perspective? Right? Because I hear some people freaking out. But then I saw this one graph of here's the stock market over the last 5 years. And it's like a little tiny glitch down. Is it an overreaction, you think? People freaking out, or no, is this bad?
Yeah, no, I do think it's an overreaction. Look, the stock market was up already close to, 14, 15% for the year. That's too much. The stock market on average goes up 7 to 8% a year. So anytime you're, 7 months into the year and you're up 15%, you should expect one of two things to happen. Either that the stock market is going to fall, or that it will fall the following year, or have very low gains in the future. We can't, the asset price appreciation will not continue to happen at, 20% a year. That's not sustainable. So what does it mean when you're up a lot, you get a pullback? We're still up a lot. It would, even if we just ended here and the stock market didn't go up at all for the rest of the year, which is a possibility, I could go down from here. We would still have a very good year. So you do have to put these things in perspective. People shouldn't panic. This is nothing like either the sell-off, by the way, we saw just when the pandemic hit, or back in 2008, 2009, when we saw very steep sell-offs. This isn't those things. It could get worse. But what we saw on Monday already, it started to bounce back partway through the day. The worst was sort of overnight and first thing in the morning, started to bounce back. And I expect we'll see some, at least when the market opens this morning, stocks will go up again. Whether they can stay up, we'll see, but they'll go up when the market opens.
I read on, I forget, CNN or something. They said 85% of experts believe that the feds will have an emergency rate drop. And if I've learned nothing over the last couple of years, is that these experts have zero idea what they're talking about. And John Carney has nailed this every single time. Was it bad enough yesterday for an emergency meeting?
Absolutely not. No, there is no emergency rate cut coming. There is no emergency meeting coming. Remember, the Fed says it has two mandates, which is the labor market and price stability. This sell-off in stocks doesn't affect the labor market and doesn't affect price stability. So this is not a problem for the Fed. The Fed also has another mandate, which is sort of and it's a little less public about it, but it brings it up, which is the proper function of financial markets. What we saw on Monday was a sell-off, but it was not a dislocation in financial markets or the financial system. We had one of those. Remember when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed and there was a run on smaller banks happening and the Fed stepped in? They didn't do an emergency rate cut, but they stepped in with emergency liquidity provisions, basically started buying stuff from banks. They made sure that the run on the banks stopped. That is not happening right now. It's possible we will. Maybe somebody will blow up because of what's happening, but we haven't seen that yet. If we get a sort of disorderly reaction to the market sell-off, the Fed could step in. I don't think they'd step in with a rate cut. I think they would prefer to do something like what we saw them do in Silicon Valley Bank, which is create some sort of new lending facility that will help out. A rate cut is a very sort of it is like a bazooka when your problem can probably be solved with a handgun, to use a very violent metaphor. You don't need the bazooka of a rate cut if there's something small going on in the financial system. And by the way, as I said, there's no sign that there's even something at that level that would need Fed intervention. There's no emergency rate cut coming. These guys who are saying this, basically, as you said, there are people who thought that the Fed was going to cut 5 or 6 times this year. And, they're probably now going to cut in September. They may cut one more time this year, but we're not getting the emergency rate cut that the market is pricing in now.
So seriously, what is that 85% of experts? What are they seeing? What are they thinking? That's different than John Carney, who's got this right the whole year. You've gotten this right.
Right.
What's wrong with them?
So one of the things is that the market gets ahead of itself, and these experts. They shouldn't, right? They should be the experts. They should be the calm, sober people. But we've seen this happen a number of times throughout this cycle where last December, the Fed said, we're probably going to cut interest rates next year, and the market priced in 5 or 6 cuts in the year. And then the Fed had to pull back and say, whoa, you guys have gotten way ahead of ourselves. We're not cutting in January. We're not cutting in March. We'll see what happens. Now we're, coming into the end of the year. They may cut. They're probably going to cut in September. That leaves us, by the way, there's only a meeting in September. There's nothing in October. There's November and December. So there's 3 more opportunities, unless they did an emergency cut, which won't happen, for the Fed to cut. What I think is much more likely to happen is the Fed, if it does decide it needs to sort of intervene, let's say the market kept crashing over the next few days, the Fed is actually holding a big conference out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They do this every year. It's a beautiful place to hold an economics conference. I would be worried if I held an economics conference in Jackson Hole that nobody would show up to see the economics papers, because it's much more, it's beautiful there. Why not just keep hiking around? But I guess the papers are so great. Maybe that's like the proof that your economic paper is amazing, because people are willing to go inside. Right? People are willing to go inside and into a conference room and listen to you present on economics rather than be out in beautiful Jackson Hole. So they're going to hold this conference. That's be a great opportunity for Jerome Powell, other Fed people to calm markets and say, yes, we see what's happening in the economy. We stand ready to intervene, to basically use their communication strategy to telegraph the rate cut that will come in September. But they won't announce a emergency rate cut unless, if something terrible happens in the world between now and the next couple of weeks, sure, they can announce an emergency rate cut. But what we've seen so far does not call for an emergency rate cut at all.
Okay. Let me ask this question first, and then I got a bigger question. So the fact that there are stock markets around the world, you mentioned Japan a couple times, have had a sell-off as well. I hear the left using that as an excuse of, well, it's not our fault. And they did this with inflation, right? People here will say, hey, Joe Biden, there's a lot of inflation. They'll say, well, our inflation here is actually lower than it is in other places around the world. So we're doing great. And it's because of the Inflation Reduction Act that we're doing so much better than these other countries around the world. Is there any credence to that?
No, this is a ridiculous point that they love to make. It's totally insane. So there's a couple problems with this kind of analysis. First of all, we are the world's biggest economy. Okay, so when you say, well, other countries have this problem, a lot of times when they have a problem, it's because they are actually importing it from us. This is very true of inflation. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. When it is losing its value, that's a problem for everybody. So we can infect the world with our inflation. We can. China can do this also, by the way. They infected the world with deflation for almost 20 years. And so, it's silly for them to argue that. Number two, when other countries are following the same policies as our country followed, which was, massive deficit spending, recklessly pouring demand into the economy, yes, they'll get the same results our leaders do. They can vote against their leaders just like we should vote against our leaders who did that to us. It doesn't mean when everybody's following the same bad track that nobody has any responsibility for it. That's like the ultimate pass the buck, right? Like, don't blame me.
Yeah.
Everybody else is just as bad off because they did the same things I did. No, you're the guy I get to vote for. I can't vote out the Chancellor of Germany, but I can vote out the President of the United States. And then
I think
finally,
it's even good.
Yeah. I was just going to say the third point here is that when they try to say like no, it's not it's just because like the Japanese market crashed, that can't mean that it's the fault of the anything going on in the U.S. economy. Of course it can. And again, because the U.S. economy and the Japanese economy are very closely tied together. We have built our economies in a very tight-knit way since World War II. We did this in part to win the Cold War because we wanted Japan, after we nuked it and defeated it and humiliated it, to build back up into a global economic superpower. We did that. Our economy is very tied to theirs. So, of course, if there is something going on in the U.S., it has repercussions in Japan. And similarly, if there's something going on in Japan, it has repercussions in the U.S.